Hello, friends. Welcome back. This will be another video sort of related to the last one. So if you haven't seen the last one, it might be helpful to go watch that first. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this diagram in a different way because one main theme from last video was that we have all of these deeply satisfying reward systems that have their roots in very primitive biological dynamics, right? Like selective pressures over very long periods of time, long before we existed, shaped and molded what we would eventually become and what we would want, crave, and desire. And we live in this tension between these primitive biological reward functions and the maintenance of a civilization that doesn't really permit all of those things to be expressed all of the time. It just doesn't work. So there's tension between those two things. And there's some other points made, but I want to focus on that because you may have heard this quote before. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Henry David Thoreau said that. And I think this is essentially why that occurs. And what that quote means is basically that people just don't actually live the way they want to. They want to do so many things. They have so many dreams that they want to be fulfilled, and they just don't do it. Like they're desperate for those needs to be met or dreams to be fulfilled, whatever it is, but there's some practical limitations that just kind of subdues or suffocates the fulfillment of that. And there's different reasons for that. A lot of it is just very practical. People might not have the resources or the time or the energy to go do the things they want in life. That's part of it for sure. But there's another big part of it that's more of a difficult problem to solve. There are desires that are fundamentally incompatible with our lives, our relationships, and in some cases, even modern civilization itself. So another way to think about this is like a vestigial brain theory of things. And this is not anatomically correct at all. Just to give you a sense of things, if you imagine there's a timeline of all biological development, hundreds of millions of years, and there's very different organisms that existed at different periods of time. The environments were different. Let's say, at the very beginning of this timeline, it's just fish or something, and fish had selective pressures put on them to do X, Y, and Z, behave in a certain way. So their reward functions were shaped by that period of developmental history in that environment. But then later, we have another ancestor in the jungle and maybe is incentivized to do slightly different behavior. And so different reward functions are created. And over time, they are cobbled together, and there ends up with parts of us, reward functions that exist inside of us, inside of our brain, nervous system, whatever, that are from an environment that doesn't really apply to us anymore. Typically, the vestigial is a term used for like whales are mammals. And a big reason we know they're mammals, or that we can prove they're mammals, is they have legs. They have little tiny leg bones inside their body that are vestigial structures from when they were on land. And so obviously the whales don't need the little legs inside their bodies, but they're still there. It's a vestigial structure. And so that's kind of the theory here, is like there's parts of us, parts of our brains, parts of what we want and what we long for that are vestigial structures from environments that really don't apply to us anymore. Like, it would be convenient if everyone's deepest desire was to succeed and thrive in the modern economy, like there's nothing that gives me greater joy than to go to an Amazon fulfillment center and walk around and pick packages. Like, that would be convenient, but that's not the reality. The reality is what we want and crave is shaped by our evolutionary history, like for completely different environments. And the other thing about this vestigial brain theory is that you might have different parts of you that have conflicting interests, right? There's no reason why like the blue area of your brain actually agrees with the green area. I think the best example of this is trying to compare pre-farming sexual behavior in humans and post-farming, like the post-civilization. This is just a theory. There's been plenty of criticism, but I think it's a reasonable one to say that for a long period of time, humans were hunter-gatherers, and there wasn't an institution of marriage. They weren't necessarily monogamous, and that shaped a long period of our developmental history. But then after farming, like 10,000 years ago-ish, humans adopted monogamy as the main form of kind of social and reproductive arrangement. So there's genuinely like two different parts of our developmental history that are pushing us in different directions. And it's a very confusing experience for people to have, right? There's some parts of us that want the stable, long-term relationship of monogamy, but then there's some parts of us that want like sexual variety and a completely different social arrangement. And these are in conflict. So all of this comes together to explain, I think, a little bit of why most people lead lives of quiet desperation, because trying to live a life where you even satisfy some part of yourself is such a strange and difficult task to pull off. And I would say that making peace with the trade-offs and choosing the best available option in life is the only way to regain some sense of autonomy. It's more or less impossible to fulfill every single aspect of your own biology and reward systems. So there are many compromises and trade-offs that you have to make in life, obviously. Like, you can only live one life. We live in a modern civilization. All sorts of constraints exist, and you have to make choices about what you want to trade off. What parts of yourself do you care to satisfy at the end of the day? What do you want to prioritize and value over other things? And you have to choose one of the available options to you, right? You can't have everything all at once. There are just a couple of choices that we get to make of like, well, I could live this kind of life, or I could live this kind of life. They're not compatible, but I do have a choice in which one I pursue. And especially seeing as a sense of agency and control is like a pillar of mental well-being, I think this is a great thing to embrace and to gain perspective on, because it just makes you more mentally healthy as a whole. You no longer feel like you don't have control over your life. You just sort of realize, okay, there's a few options that are available to me, and I get to pick one. An example of this on a small scale is waking up in the morning and thinking, oh, geez, I've got to go to work, but I really don't want to. Feels like you're being forced into it. All it takes to regain a sense of control in that situation is to just consider, well, like I don't have to go to work. If I wanted to, I could just stay, I could opt out. But then I won't get paid. And I actually do want to get paid. I do like nice things. I do want my house to stay here. So in a grand sense, I do want this. I want this life. I want to go to work. I want to be paid. And then you regain a sense of control over your situation. Additionally, you have to choose which parts of yourself are going to be expressed and which parts are going to be stifled in your lifetime, right? Especially if there are these vestigial structures that are at odds with each other. You can't satisfy them both. And this is not a clean process. This is messy. This is kind of like where the Jungian shadow concept comes in. If there are some parts of you that you deem are, essentially not appropriate to express, you might psychologically separate it into like the good parts of you and the evil parts of you, or the parts of you that need to be repressed, and that turns into the shadow self, and that's a whole mess too. That's actually kind of at odds with the long-term project of mental well-being. So it's all a challenge. It's all a big challenge. Something that I do think is interesting, I just learned about focal seizures that a condition where it's like localized to a certain part of the brain, and a treatment that they have is that they can do a brain scan, trigger the seizure, see what part of the brain lights up, later identify, okay, so that's where the seizures come from. Let's just figure out, let's make a list of all of the basic important brain functions that we want to preserve, like, okay, motor functions, language, eyesight. Let's just make a list of a few important things, see where they are, make sure we don't destroy that, and then we cut out the part of the brain where the seizures come from. And that work, like, it's essentially a modern version of a lobotomy, where you just kill a part of the brain brain that's causing a problem. That was wild to me, and honestly, I feel like you could probably do this on a normal human if there are parts of your brain that you didn't like, you wanted to get rid of. Like if a pedophile wanted to destroy that part of their brain, they could probably have the same process done and more or less lobotomize that part that they didn't want anymore. I don't know if that's ever happened. I feel like it's obviously an ethical gray area, but I think it would be possible. It's a little very dystopian. I mean, another example of behavior that humans would be interested in tamping down. If you've ever seen a graph of men and women and the ages that they find attractive over time, women, it kind of corresponds with their age, right? If you're 20 years old, you're attracted to men that are 20 years old. If you're 30, you're attracted to 30-year-old men. And it just goes up in a line. But then you look at the graph of men, and it just stays at like 20 to 23 years old until they die, right? Like their whole life. Men are continuously attracted to that same exact age. I'm willing to bet that there's a lot of like 40 and 50-year-old men that are just trying their best to stay in their marriage. And they're like, Jesus, why? If I could kill this part of my brain that keeps looking at 20-year-olds and thinking they're attractive, that would be real convenient. So yeah, another reminder, like just because something is natural doesn't mean it's good. Yeah, naturalistic fallacy, all that. Anyways. Also, one more point. Not all desires that we have are evidence that it's a hardwired aspect of our evolutionary history, right? Like there's so many things that are just sort of trained into us. It's like a Pavlovian response of if you just watch a ton of pornography, then that kind of twists and perverts your natural sexual preferences in a certain way. Advertisements are trying to manipulate you all the time. The mechanisms of dopamine depletion with social media is also just a huge perversion of natural desires and natural reward mechanisms. So just because you have a desire for something does not mean it's hardwired into you. I think a lot of those pathological desires or perverted desires can be resolved. I mean, you just need a good hard reset. Do some mushrooms, get some prayer, do them both. Just try to get a clean slate up there and you'll have a much clearer idea of what's actually going to make me happy. When you clear away that murky, cloudy stuff, the super normal stimulus of like exposing yourself to things that you weren't designed to see and all that, you have a much better connection with what would actually make you happy. And it makes this whole problem of living a life of quiet desperation, it makes it a lot easier to at least see like the handful of things that would make me happy if I could manage to do them. The unfortunate situation is most of us are so engaged with technology and supernormal stimulus that we don't even know what would make us happy, let alone the capacity to go and get it for ourselves. So that's tough. Again, really providing no solutions here, just a lot of dismal perspectives. I mean, I almost wonder, like, there's theories about humans being the biological bootloader for AI. And I do wonder if the animal nature of humanity, the physical nature of humanity, will continue to be eroded because nature is so full of barbarism and suffering and competition. And I kind of imagine AIs of 100 years in the future that there's only computers talking to each other, and they reminisce about humanity and how gross and messy we were and how everything we wanted was immoral and unethical. And I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but it is strange to think about. So anyway, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm just guessing. But I do know that the project for today, the project for me, the human being alive right now, is to try to connect with and understand your nature and what would be fulfilling to you as a person, as a human being, right? An embodied physical human being that's both spirit and animal, right? What would be fulfilling to you? And then just do your best, do your darndest to realize that vision or those dreams that you have in a way that actually works and is ethical and fits into society. That's the project. And none of us will be able to do that to a full extent. We're not going to be 100% fulfilled in life, but I hope that we can try our best and do something that we're proud of and that we enjoy and is deeply fulfilling. That's what I hope. And that's what I'm trying to do for myself. So that's it for today. I think it's a little bit shorter than the last one. I will see you later.